Welcome, everyone. Thank you all for joining us again for this live stream event. My name is Rebecca. I'm the event planner of the Microsoft Reactor New York. Before we begin, if you're familiar, we usually do a couple of slides to run through in advance of the session starts. So our code of conduct, Microsoft Reactor seeks to provide a respectful environment for both our audience and presenters. We encourage engagement in the chat, but just be mindful of your commentary, remain on topic and professional. If this is your first time joining us, just note that we do record these sessions and then upload them for on-demand access to YouTube, usually within 48 to 72 hours. So if you're not able to stay for the entirety of the session, if you have to drop off early or if there's something that's covered that you want to revisit, this is available at a later time. This is the fourth session in an ongoing series, a 5-part series. So if you missed any of the earlier sessions, do feel free to check out our Microsoft Reactor YouTube channel. I'll share the playlist location for you in the chat momentarily. If you have questions and this is your first time using YouTube, you do need to have an account set up with YouTube to interact in the chat, which you can do so now. Or if you have questions, you can always reach out to us at a later time. And then today's session. So we have Alfredo with us again. Let me bring us both up. Let's add us to the stream. Hey, Alfredo. We're here again, back again, session 4. So as mentioned just before, this is part of a series. This is the 4th session out of 5. Today we'll be covering functions and modules. So looking forward to that. It looks like we already have a good amount of people in the room. Hello, audience. Welcome. Hope you're excited and ready to get started with more Python. The session will run for about 60 minutes, and we'll have time for questions throughout. So I'll pass it to you, Alfredo.
Yeah, thank you so much, Rebecca. Good day to everyone. Buen día para todos. I'm very excited to be here again. This is our almost the last one. We have one more to go for our whole series on getting started with Python. And today we're going to be talking about functions and modules. Functions, it's really like once we've already covered like variables and conditionals and how to work with logic, how to work with some of the data structures that we have in Python, and how can they can help us out, like lists and dictionaries, where they are so crucial to have a really good understanding, like good working session for your program, for your Python program. But the next step, like you're starting to like build up your programming, like the next step is functions. The other day I was interviewing someone that was new to Python, and I asked them, this was for like a internship position, just like a temporary position doing some Python. And I asked them, it's like, hey, imagine yourself, you're getting hired, and the position is you're going to be doing some Python, and you have to deal with this one big program that someone left there before. Like this, there's an engineer that was working on it, and your boss says like, hey, welcome, day one. Here you have this Python file. It's a working program, and now we need you to take care of it. Like you are now owning this Python program, and please just help us out, make it more robust, like improve it, help us out. What would you do? So that was my question, and the follow-up questions were like, well, like how well designed is this file? And I said, it's horrible. It is absolutely horrible. It is bad, very bad. It is 1,000 lines long, no functions, and it's just very, very like compacted. And if you see a function, it's probably another 1,000 lines in there. Nobody understands what's going on, and that's the problem. So that's the problem. It's not necessarily an imaginary situation. I've dealt before with production code that was like hundreds and hundreds of lines long, and it's like, I don't understand. Like at some point you start losing track. It's kind of like if you've ever played chess, it's kind of like that. It's like where you have to keep track of every single move on the board. We're like, well, if I do here, we covered logic and if and else statements a couple of sessions ago. So you have to say, well, if it goes here and then that happens and this other thing happens and this condition is true, then I'm going to land there. But if I scroll back and go to the beginning and try that exercise again, I might land over here. And so you have to like constantly keep that mental map of the whole thing, and it's just not good. And so welcome to functions, because functions are here to help us. Don't necessarily put thousands or hundreds of lines in a function because it would be the same problem. But if you can make your functions really small, you can get to the next level as a programmer. And this is what we're going to try today. We're going to see what functions are, how do they work, what can we do with them, and then we're going to take it to the next step by using modules and import these functions, import these modules, and make them work elsewhere, which is the premise for robust code, and at least in Python, reusable, maintainable, readable code. These three things: reusable, maintainable, and readable. So that's the objective. And how we're going to do that? Functions and modules. All right, let's get started. We are going to be kind of following the learning path, creating reusable functionality with functions in Python. The learning path link is going to come in the chat. So please go ahead and follow that. Just as a reference, that we're gonna not go one-to-one. I'm here to kind of like show you from scratch how we can make use of that. All right, so we have that, and we're going to use today VS Code. I have 2 blank files. I'm going to try to work with them and see what we can do there. We're going to use VS Code, Python, and if we have some time in the end, we can use some Jupyter notebooks to try and work with those files and modules and functions that we've created. I'm going to go to Visual Studio Code. This is an vanilla VS Code installation. I have 2 files. Let's just ignore the main.py, and we're going to use the user underscore input.py file. So what is it that we're going to do there? Let's open that. Right? There's nothing in here, like completely empty. What are we going to do? What's the task today? In the previous series, we were seeing a little bit about logic. If something is in this list, and like we can say it's true, otherwise it's false. We're going to take that example and we're going to make a function out of it. So the idea is, and I'm going to type exactly what the idea is. I'm going to create a doc string. It's a good idea to put a doc string at the very top. It doesn't mean anything. It doesn't do anything. It's just descriptive. And it would act almost the same as a comment. So if you want to do a comment, in Python, you do comments like this, right? But you can also add a doc. This is called a doc string. And we're going to do a file level, a module level doc string. So the premise, we're going to write what the instructions are. So here we're going to say, create a function that, given some input that is a string type, some string input, will output true or false. So the function is going to accept an input, it's going to look into it, and based in some logic, will say, that's a true, or nope, that's a false, right? Pretty simple. We've kind of like seen this a little bit before. Now we're going to take it to the next level by using a function. So true values in strings will be like, 1 and y and yes. And false values are like 0 and n and no. So that's pretty straightforward. We need to look at those 6 values in coming in as a string, and then see what we can do with that. So let's start. Like, if you've never seen functions before, they can be daunting a little bit. The first time you see functions, like, oh, I don't know, it's kind of like a weird construct. Let's make it even easier. Let's start without writing a function. I'm going to write the logic for this with you, and we'll see if if we can get into trouble, and if we don't, we can make it a function later. All right. As I start typing the exercise, let's just do a quick poll question. Like, if you could answer on the comments if you've ever seen functions before, if you've ever worked with functions, do comment yes on functions, otherwise no. And then I kind of like gauge a little bit your experience with functions. And please feel free to ask me any questions as I'm plowing through the content. And if something is not clear, you can say like, hey, that last thing that you said, not very clear. Can you go please and do that again? Excellent. So we are getting some people that have, oh, perfect. That's fantastic. So lots of people have worked with functions before. All right, but still, let's just use these as, let's start writing the Python code, right? So what's the input? Perfect. Yeah, thank you so much for answering those questions, Stephen, Hussam, Danielle, Mark, Alan. It's just great. Thanks so much. And again, please ask me any question if something's not quite right. All right, so we have some input. We're gonna say input. We're gonna make it a 1, and then we're gonna say let's capture the values that we want in a list, just kind of like what we did before. So we're gonna say true vowels are what is it, 1 and y, and we can say yes, right? And false vowels are 0 and n, and we're gonna say no, right? It's good. So we're gonna say, ooh, I mistyped. Ooh, it's because input is let's call this function input. So the reason I hesitated there is because input is a keyword in Python. If you type input, that's a built-in function. So beware of overriding built-in functions. You don't want to do that. All right, so this is pretty simple. What we want to do is if function underscore input in vowels, we're going to say, and we're going to get into trouble here a little bit because I can't return. So I would say here I would return, but I'm going to say print true, else print false. Now this else, it could be else, elif, it could be elif false vowels in elif function input in false vowels in false, right? So that's the logic. And of course I messed up the print. This is why having a good text editor is pretty good. We're defining our logic here. We're making sure it's sound. What we're gonna do is we're gonna return some values, but that's the logic, kind of like roughly speaking. We're gonna make it like really good right now. So we're gonna check this input, and that's the work. So what is going on here? This idea of accepting some input, looking at it like, this looks like a true, this looks like a false, is actually pretty useful. And this example comes from a production code problem. So I had someone provide me some input that would always be as a string, and what would happen there is that I had to process the string to understand, like, is the user want to go ahead? Like, have you ever had a program in a terminal saying, hey, are you sure you want to continue? Right? Type yes or y or a 1 to continue, otherwise 0 or no or n to cancel, or just Control C. So that's the idea here. All right, so we have these. How would a function would work here? Well, the way a function works is, first we need to write the proper syntax, and we start that with writing def. So every time you're writing a function, you start with def, and then the name of the function. Try to name your functions in a way that will help you understand what the function is about. So that's really, really important, because if what happens if your function is doing 20 different things? you'd be like, it would be very difficult to kind of like name something, right? If it's doing 20 different things, that's key, because that's a red flag. Oh, I don't know what to call this thing, because it's talking to the database, and it's making an HTTP request, and it's processing then some user input, and it's creating all of these data structures, and it's normalizing the data. It's like, what do I call this? Let's call it util or helper or something generic, and that's a problem. We have something very concise here, very, very concise, like just a few lines, and we're gonna call these string to bool. So string to bool is going to be our function name. Next, we need to use parens. So we're gonna use that, and then I'm not gonna do anything right now with this function, and I'm just going to say pass. So that's the general normal structure of a function. We use def, and then we use the name. It has to use underscores if you're going to try to separate the words, and then the parens, colon, and then the next line, all your code has to be indented. Functions allows us to return values as opposed from the code that is all the way up here. So if we say string to boolean, we can say pass. This is not going to do anything. We can say you can return something. You can say return true, for example, right? And then it allows you to return values given some inputs, or sometimes you don't need to accept any inputs. These functions, as it's written, does not accept any input. So if you want to pass some value, it's not going to work. So only with you can only call it without any inputs, and it's just always going to return true. So the way I'm gonna quickly comment this out. I'm gonna take advantage, and I know everything looks kind of like weird right now. I'm gonna try to get rid of these code blocks so like it doesn't mess with us. So the way you call a function, if I run this file, let's quickly run this file. If I run this file, nothing absolutely happens. Nothing happens, because to use a function, you need to call it. So if we go here and say string to bool like that, and then we run it, let's try and run it. Nothing happens, because we're getting a value, but we're not printing it out. So let's say print is right, called play or run, and then now we get true. So what you're seeing here below in the terminal is let's make these a little bit bigger. Let's I guess that's fine. I wanted to kind of like get rid of these. All right. So we have true there. Our function is not doing anything useful. And now we want to accept some value. What happens if I pass a value? Like you should always try to break stuff and see what happens. So let's see what happens if I run this. So you're gonna get a type error. Takes 0 positional arguments, but 1 was given. We got an input on a function that does not accept an input. So let's start changing this. We're gonna go into string to bool, and we're going to accept, and we're gonna call this a string. Okay, we're gonna call this a string. That's the name of our input, and we are going to say, we are going to grab this code that we have here, and we're gonna cut it, and we're gonna paste it here. And we're gonna have to change the indentation, so everything is messed up. See how the true vals starts in the first column. Once something is inside a function, you need to create some indentation. I'm gonna do that line by line. It needs to be nested, because now this code belongs to the function. Okay. Let's see how we can, I think we can get rid of that. So we accept a string is not used. That's why you see, I don't know if you can see it in how the editor represents this, but it's not used anywhere. And so it's not highlighted. What we need to do is we need to change function input. Remember, we had that before, and we're gonna say if string, right? If string in true vals, print true. And we're gonna change that also in a second. We're gonna say elif if string in false vals, print. We're not gonna print anything. We are going to return. We want to return. You can only return from functions and methods. You cannot return in procedural code. Like if you're not within a function, you cannot return. You can only return whenever you're in a function or you're in a method. We're not covering methods today, but same behavior. So return true, right? Return true, and then we're gonna say here return false. Okay, so we have if string in true vals, return true, string in false vals, return false. It's pretty straightforward. What happens if we run this again? Well, I think we're gonna get into trouble once more. Look at that. Now we went from a function that does not require an argument to one that does. So now this function can only work correctly if you're accepting an input. And this input, this arg is called argument. And the error message calls it a positional argument. It's saying, hey, I require some input and you are calling me without an input. That's because here on line 20, we're saying string to bool, empty parentheses. There's nothing in there. So what would happen if I say y here? So if I say y and I run this again, we're going to get a true down below. So now we're interacting with this function. We're passing some inputs. You can also, we've seen functions that don't take inputs, function that takes an input, a required input, but we can also make it optional. And the way we make it optional is by saying, say, for example, string equals, by default, equals y. So what does this mean? That if someone doesn't pass an input, it will say yes. So I'm going to remove the input here. I'm going to call it again. And so now it's optional. I didn't pass anything, but the function defines something that is going to fall back. Ooh, if I didn't get an input, the value is going to be y. So if I say, and here, I'm going to get probably a false. And that works, right? So now I can work with inputs and without inputs. I personally prefer, like, I would be very upset if I find something like this in production. Not the fallback or the default balancing option, but this would be very deceiving. If I want something to process some input and I want to pass an input and I want to know exactly what that input is, I want to require it. So let's fall back on that and just make this required again. So that is how our function is going to work. All right, so I'm going to remove this thing and clean it up. All right, I'm going to save that. I'm going to get rid of my terminal over here. And next, what we're going to do, so I save this string to bool function in user underscore input. So what are we doing with modules? Where a module in Python is a file. And if you're defining your functions there, you can import them elsewhere. This is pretty key to have good structured programs that where you can kind of like send certain things on one file. In this case, we've called this user input. So if we further wanted to process this string, we could add another helper function over there below and do some other stuff. And then separation of concerns, right? That's really important. If everything is in one single file, that's a problem. When you open a fridge, you have these divisions, like even when like a brand new fridge, you have like, oh, sometimes it's even labels like butter or vegetables, or colder area for fruits, and other generic areas where like other things go. But you have some sort of organization, like small bottles or anything that has to go standing, perhaps you can go in the door, on the door. In my case, our family likes to have ketchup and other like mustard and other things like that, like as soon as you open the door. And so we have some sort of organization. That's critical, that's essential. You have to use those skills when you're writing code. In this case, I could have called this file utils or helpers, but helpers for what are we talking about here, right? So try to be explicit whenever possible, whenever it's reasonable. Try to be reasonable and use critical thinking. But I'm talking about these things, and like it's not necessarily clear how we use this string to bool function. So let me create a Jupyter notebook, right? Jupyter notebook, we're gonna say Jupyter, we're gonna say yes, right there. I open the command palette, and I'm gonna select Jupyter, create new Jupyter notebook. Have the Jupyter extension there. We've already covered how to get this running, and we have this untitled one. So what is a module? I'm gonna do things here to work with modules. We already have a module. Can you believe that? So our module is called user input. So we're gonna say import user underscore input. And look at that. VS Code and Jupyter in this case is also helping us autocomplete. It detected that there's a user underscore input file in the current directory, and it's allowing me to import that. So I'm going to say, I even have a typo. I said use input, but no, it's not use input, it's user input. So I'm going to click that, make it user input. So if I click run I'm going to have to select the kernel, which I haven't selected before. We're not going to install any, well, we're probably going to have to install some libraries. So let's just use something that I know it's like a temporary directory, a temporary virtual environment. I'm going to use that, and then I'm going to run this. That only means, hey, connect to this Python interpreter here. It's a virtual environment. I know it works. And now I'm going to click run, and then it imported my user input. So here's a quick thing that we can do, like when we're dealing with inputs, like with modules, with Python modules. Here's a cool trick that I usually like to do. Is like, where is this thing coming from? Because you're importing this thing as if it just like appears somewhere, if it's something that is available somehow. But what if you don't know where it's coming from? Here's a cool trick: print user underscore input. Look at that. We can run that, and come on. And then look at that. So we get module user input from users Alfredo code demo user underscore input. I'm getting the path. So that's pretty useful. Python is full of modules and libraries. So we can even change these and say, for example, what about the OS module, right? With the OS module is pretty popular for working with paths and files and all kinds of operating system type of interactions. So we can try to do that. Import OS, and then we can say print OS. Look at that. Now we're going to say, we're going to run that. So OS is no longer coming from the current directory, right? That's coming from my virtual environment. And it's up home, like a very long, very long path. It's actually, this one in particular is not coming from a virtual environment. That is coming from my actual Python installation, because remember, virtual environments do this linking thing behind the scenes. But now you know where this is coming from. All right, so we have this thing. We have user input. We've imported user input, but like, where's our function? Like, I want to use that function. So okay, well, we want to use that function. There's a couple of ways that you can work with here. And again, use a way of try to be reasonable with the way you import and use things. I'm going to show you two ways, and I'm going to tell you a little bit about the pros and cons of each way of dealing with our little user input module here. So I'm gonna remove this import OS, right? We've imported user input, and then what I can do here is I can say print. Well, the way this works is user input dot. Look at that. Our second option here from the autocomplete menu is the name of our function. So the name of our function now belongs to the module name. So user input.py is our module, string to bool or str to bool is our function. Now that's separated by a dot. That means user input is the module, and string to bool is the child or the thing that belongs to that module. So that's the dot separation. So we can say string to bool, and it will autocomplete, and we can say y, and this should just work, and we should get. We didn't get anything there, but we can print it out and see what happens. Oh, I think it is because, yeah, I'm getting a none. Aha! This is great. I was forgetting this. I'm just so happy that this happened to me. You might be saying, well, that's kind of weird, Alfredo. Like, what's going on here? Why are you getting a none? Let's go quickly to user input and see what's going on here. We're getting input in, let's go here. We're line 9. We're getting the string input, and then we're checking if it's in true vowels, false vowels. We're checking if that's there, return true, checking if it's not in false, and return false. So why are we getting a none? We're not returning a none, right? We don't have anything here that says return none. So where is this none coming from? I think that's very surprising, right? I think that's very surprising. When I encountered these the first time, I was like, what is going on with this thing? Where is this none coming from? So here's a thing that happens with Python functions. Python functions implicitly always return a none. When something is not matched, so I passed a, what was it that I passed? What was it, like an underscore y? Yeah, so y as an underscore. So I passed that, and that doesn't exist in the true values, right? It doesn't, it's not there. So when line 12 hits, if string in true values is not there, and when line 14 checks if string like lowercase y in false values, no, it's not there. What's the function going to do? Nothing, and it's going to return you a none. So if you're looking to get a value and somehow you're not returning a none, and for whatever reason you're like, why am I having a none? This shouldn't be any value at all. Well, you're gonna get a none because no condition was met. So what are we gonna do here? So don't be surprised if some functions don't return anything. By the way, some functions are meant to affect behavior, or they're called like behavior or behavior-based or behavioral functions, code that does something. Like say for example, send an alert, right? Like imagine you have like a very rich API piece of code in Python that connects to an HTTP API somewhere else. It connects there and sends a text message, an alert to someone. It's like, hey, this thing is not working. You should be alerted. It did something. Doesn't necessarily return you anything, right? So that's kind of like an example of something that would be behavioral or a behavior-based function. It's doing something. But sometimes we want a function to take an input, process something, and then return you something back. And so in that case, you do want the return value. So whenever you have something that returns none, well, it could be or it could not be a thing that is related to an implicit return. So again, a none is implicitly going to always be there. I could always write return none to all of my functions, but it's not necessarily in Python best practices or normal expected Python code. You don't see usually like making the implicit none explicit unless you are really looking to return a none for a valid reason. In this case, we don't want to return a none. I think that would be an error condition. Let's make these let's make this function a little bit more robust. All right, we are going to do a trick here. I like to do this, like, it's not like a trick, it's more like a pattern. So I'm going to reassign the string variable. And so a string is the input, and I'm going to reassign it. And I'm going to reassign because I'm going to modify the string value, the string input, and I'm going to lower it. So I'm going to say string equals string that lower. All right. So what I'm doing there is saying, hey, like regardless of what is coming in, just try to, I'm using the dot lower. It's a method on this on strings that you can use. There's upper as well if you want to make it uppercase. I'm relying on the fact that, that the user is going to pass me some input and it's going to be a string, and that I'm going to make it lower and it's just going to work, right? So that way I'm making a case insensitive solution. So it doesn't matter what casing you're using, it's just going to work. So let's go back to our Jupyter notebook here. And I'm going to, I think Jupyter will allow me to not use print. So that's a nice thing. Like if you want to try things out, like if I run these, I think this should work. No, it wants me to print it out. That's fine. Oh, what's going on here? Maybe I didn't save these, or let's see, string that lower. Let's debug these. We're getting into trouble here. I think this should work. So we can say, wow, yes. Oh, I had not saved this. Well, maybe we can save it there. Maybe we can try that. Oh, it wants now me to select again this thing. It's fine. String to bool. That should work with a yes. So we're getting into trouble here. I am not sure. How about we raise a an exception here, or we can say print do not know. We can use an F string here. Now we're debugging, like we're getting into trouble. Like what's going on? I don't necessarily I don't necessarily know what's going on. So let's try to debug it. Do not know what happened. Value, we can say string, and do that, and then save this, and then run it from here. So somehow I think this might be stale, right? The list values must be in lowercase. Well, if you're, oh, very good. Guys, like I think you're great. You are great. Yes, Daniel, like change the listing. So what we, very good. See, you know, I've been doing Python for about 10 years, and sometimes I mess up. And today was one of those days where, and this is normal, by the way. You can stay here. You can stay here trying this out and not getting what you want, and without success. Now we're still getting a none. So I'm still thinking that we have here something that is stale. Let's try to do this. Oops, no. Let's see. Help menu drives me nuts. Let's print out the value of string here and see if we are getting that. So I think we're having something stale here. Let's try. No, but like, see, if I go back to user input and I comment this out, if I'm printing out as soon as I call it, I think that is stale. No, I do not want. Let's make another cell and see this again. What happens? Import user input, and then let's call user input that string to bool. Do that, and let's see if that changes. See print. So something's going on with this Jupyter notebook, and I'm going to reload my window. I'm not trusting what I'm seeing here, and I'm going to trying to connect to the kernel. I'm going to run it there. Yes, I knew it. So let me tell you what happened here. Somehow Jupyter got into trouble, and the import statement was stale. Right? What does that mean? That as soon as Python imports something and it holds it in memory, you can change the file, but that doesn't necessarily reflect the import. Like the import already happened, right? It's kind of like a picture. Hey, Alfredo, we have a picture from you from last week, and your hair was longer. Yeah, but like I changed my hair today. Why? Like the picture is not gonna update, right? Same deal. So I was suspecting that, and I thought by saving the Jupyter notebook, I would get out of trouble, but I didn't, and I knew that because I was adding a print statement. See, like I'm adding the print statement on line 10. So as soon as you call that function, it should just work. So we don't need that. Let me remove it, but let's go back. Let's go back to the point I was trying to make in the beginning, and we got in trouble. So this works. If I say that, why it works. If I do camel case now, if I do these, that should work as well, right? The input is yes, but it's still true. If I say no, like that, I'm getting a false. If I say no with like all uppercase, it's still a false, right? So so by doing these, I'm just making sure that everything's just working. Wow, like what? That was that was a weird one, but it's useful. It's very useful to get into this type of trouble and try to uh, get. Getting into these kind of problems. But we made a very good fixes here. We made our true vowels and our false vowels all lowercase because we made a case insensitive. We're lowering everything, and so now anything works. Now I don't need to specify different values with different casing. So um, real case problem, real world problem. But now let's just take it a bit beyond, and let's use main.py. Let's just assume the main.py is going to be our program. We're going to call this in the terminal. So now you're in charge. You're an engineer. You want to use this string to bool a function, and want to use it in a program. So we're going to run another function here. I'm going to call it main, and we're going to do this, and then we're going to use well, before that, let me pass that. Before that, we want to import our flashy new module. We're gonna say this is the other way of importing this from user input import string bool. So this is a nice way of also like being explicit about what is it that you want to use. So here in main, I have too many spaces. We're gonna say response input. Would you like to continue? Right? So we're requesting input from the user, and then we're going to say here if string response is going to be a bool, right? So I'm going to say if string to bool response. That means if the return value from our string to bool function is true, then we can say print user wants to continue, else user does not want to continue. And then I'm going to do a kind of like horrible thing in Python that I don't know like why it is, but it's, if you want to make these callable from the command line, you're gonna do this little thing. If you're gonna see this in a lot of programs, if name dunder name equals dunder main dunder or underscore, you're gonna call the main function. What is this thing doing? If you're calling this with Python main.py, it's going to look at line 11 and it's like, oh yeah, the name of these of these this is being, it recognizes that it's being called over the command line. It's going to do this. So I'm gonna run it, right? And I run it. Ooh, and look at that. It's prompting me. Would you like to continue? So how about we do yes, I want, I'm like very sure I want to continue. User wants to continue, right? I hit enter and it's like user. So what's going on here? The input built-in function is capturing my input as a string, and then that's getting passed into my string to bool helper over here on the user input thing. And it's saying no, like the true value, oh, that's true, like I'm going to return a true. Yeah, the user wants to do something with that, otherwise it's returning a false. And so that is making a real use case here. We're now, we had a couple of things. We had a Jupyter notebook. We got into trouble trying to import things. They got stale. Now these won't get stale. Like, see, like if I say here, and is this stale? So if I say that and save it and run main.py, and I run it, and I say for example, no, I don't want to run it. Is this stale? Well, no, it isn't. So now it's catching that. You know what the difference is? I've started the program from scratch. I use Python, the interpreter, to call my main.py function, which imports, only then it imports the user underscore input module, uses my function, everything from scratch. So in memory, Python has a memory allocation. In memory, everything's fresh, everything's allocated right there and then, and it executes and it works. So you're not gonna get into that stale problem. You get into staleness or old code that you got some changes and it's old code that is still running when you have a long running process. If this was a web server or if this was like a web framework and it's a long running process and you're changing things under the hood, well, things are not going to show up immediately. So that's the problem. All right. So I know we had like a few questions. So let me, I know we have still a few minutes left, but before I continue and kind of like summarize everything that we did, let me just go through some of the questions that we had. So Prasenjit Pike had a question. When we already imported a module, do we still need to qualify the method name with the module name? Well, whenever you're importing the module that contains, say, your function, you have to write the whole thing, right? The function will not necessarily appear in your namespace. This is called the namespace. In Python, whenever you're importing things, you are making names available in your program, and that availability is called the namespace. So it's available now, it exists now, you can use it. So if you want to use the string to bool function and you're only importing user underscore input, then that means that you were always going to have to use user underscore input dot, the name of the function, which in this case is string to bool. So, but I show you the other way of also of importing this, which is from user underscore input, import the name of my function, which in our case was string to bool, and you can use that. So another question, so does that mean I can return different types from a function, true, false, integer, string? Yes, absolutely. You can return anything. You can return even data structures. You can even return, yes, you can actually return absolutely anything. You can even return another function. That's kind of like a more advanced pattern. But a function can also, you can say, well, get me something that I can use to sort these. And say, for example, you're passing either a list or a dictionary. You want to sort it, right? And then you get like a helper that will make you sort either a list or a dictionary. It will get you a function that then you can call. So that's a pretty advanced feature that you might want to use. But yes, in short, excellent question. Yes, you can return any types of value. We just saw, well, returning a boolean because it's easier to reason about. It's pretty straightforward for the use case that we want. It's valid. Like I've used it in production code, and allows you to have like a very specific type of return. But yes, you can return a string. You can return all kinds of different types. I think pretty much any type. So reading through the questions. Also from Bruce, do we need to include user underscore input in the function call when we have imported it already? Yes, but depends on how you imported the function. If you've imported a function from user input, so say from user underscore input, kind of like what I did in main.py, from user underscore input, import string to bool, then you can use string to bool directly. If you're saying import user underscore input, then you have to say, when you want to use the function, you have to say user underscore input dot string to bool. So that was great. We definitely got into some trouble. And yeah, please, like if you have any other questions, go ahead. Like I'm just going to try to summarize what we did today and kind of like walk you through some of the problems, some of the things, kind of like what the goal was here. We wanted to talk about functions, and we talked about functions that required input, functions that were I'm going to close these. Oh yeah, that's a very good question. Let me see. I'm going to try to close this thing. We went into we created a module called user input.py. We learned that modules are Python files. And once a Python file exists, well, we can import that. In this case, user underscore input is in the same path where we're running VS Code. We can import that. It's available. We could use the print function to print out a module and see where it's coming from. We saw that OS was coming from a different place. User underscore input is coming from the current working directory, but it showed me the whole path. Very useful feature. And then we played around with calling functions that require arguments, without arguments, getting some exceptions, getting some errors. And then we also made these string input something that was optional. Then we decided to go back and not make it optional, make it required. So we saw the difference between making it required and not required, required or optional. And then we got into trouble using Jupyter notebooks because we were making changes to these. I forgot to make everything lower in true vals and false vals lists so that the input would work. And of course, when you're pair programming, live coding, like you're going to get into trouble. Even in professional settings, you're going to get into trouble and be like, why is this thing not working? Oh, and then you come back and it's like, oh yeah, of course, I forgot to do this. Then now everything makes sense. And we saw what stale problems are can be caused whenever you have a long running process, like, for example, a Jupyter notebook, which is not the case when you're running a program from scratch. We created a main.py, which can be used as a command line tool. All right, so we have one question from Aditya. Great question. Yes, can you explain if name equals? Yes, it is such an annoying thing, really. But let's see what happens here. Let's see what happens here if I comment this out. I'm going to save these, and then I'm going to run it, and let's see what happens. If I run it, nothing happens. I don't get my prompt. Why is that? Well, that is because nothing is calling my function. So you could very well say, hey, Alfredo, like if you just want to run the function, what would be the problem of just doing this at the end of the file? And you will be right. Like, yes, you can definitely do that. And if I run it again, it's going to work. Let's see that. yes, it works. So I want to say yes. User wants to continue. Perfect. But there's a problem. There's a problem here where, hey, why, like this is good, but like what happens if you import main.py? So how about that? Let's create a new file, and we're gonna call these other.py, right? And then we're going to say, I'm gonna say import main. That's it. I'm gonna import main, and then that's it. I'm gonna save it, and then I'm gonna run it. So you know what's going to happen here? This is going to trigger behavior. Oh, I run it, I click play or run, and it says, would you like to continue? It's like, oh no, don't do that. I just want to import you so I can use some of the stuff that you have in that module. And now I'm getting behavior in the terminal, right? So how do you go around that? Well, that's the Python crutch that we have right here. And what is it that we're going to do? Well, that's why the if dunder name equals dunder main, then call main. So if I save that and I go to other.py and I run these, nothing happens. Beautiful, because now I've that condition means, hey, only do these, only execute this piece of code if and only if this is being called by Python on the command line on the terminal. Like if it's Python space main.py, then you run main function. If someone is importing me as a module, just don't do anything. All right. Yeah. So thank you so much again for joining today. We saw functions. Try to make your code more readable and reusable. If you see something that is repeated, extract it into a function. I think that's a great way of being a good developer. Someone that is writing robust code, is making things readable. If you see something that is 100 lines long, not good. Like, go in and start extracting and seeing what pieces of, like, what logical pieces of that code you can extract, make it smaller, make it in a function, and make things more readable, more maintainable, and more robust. Because if it's readable and maintainable, then it's going to be more robust. Like, you're going to say thank you to yourself, because you'll be like, oh, this thing is 5 lines long. Of course I can understand what's going on. I don't have to keep a mental map of what's going on. All right. Well, thank you so much. Please reach out to me. Like, if you have any questions, there's going to be a recording. Rebecca is going to go through the details. I'm always active on LinkedIn. You're going to reach out, ask me questions there as well. Happy to answer any questions. And remember, next week is our last one, and I hope to see you there as well.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Alfredo. Lots of good interaction here in the chat. Thank you to the audience for, taking this time to really engage. That's why we're running these live series, because we want to be able to give you the opportunity to ask questions and really get involved so that your learning experience is much more fruitful. Because just doing a Learn module alone in your house, it's not the same kind of experience. So thank you again, Alfredo. This was a great session today, as he mentioned, and what we mentioned much earlier in the session as well. Next week is the final session, November 3rd, same time, same place. Come back, hang out. We're gonna do create your first Python program. So all of these sessions leading up to this moment are gonna help us contribute to that final one in the series. There's some people asking for more, Alfredo. They want more Python.
That's great.
Lots of questions asking, are you on Twitch?
I am not on Twitch. I probably should do this on Twitch.
Twitch is like the new thing, I feel like it's really like coming.
But this is great. This is
popular.
great. Thank you so much, everyone, for wonderful to have these comments. I really appreciate it a ton. I do it with, I'm very happy to do this. I'm very happy to teach you all of that, all of this stuff, all of these tricks, and getting into trouble and answering your questions.
Yeah. And just a couple more slides here, just sorry to keep it going. I dropped in the chat our survey link. If you have a chance, do fill it out. We use that information to kind of develop more content. Your info lets us know like who our audience is, what your experience levels are, and then that kind of helps us figure out where we can go from here. And then if you're not part of our community, join our community. We're on Meetup. We have physical spaces around the world. If you happen to not live right where one of those places are, right now most of our sessions are virtual, and we plan to keep a hybrid kind of workspace going in the future. So join one of them if it works for you time zone wise. We have a website, microsoftreactor.com. Sign up for our newsletter and check us out on Twitter. All right. Take care, everyone. Bye now.